So let's talk about pronouns. So first of all, like, what's a pronoun anyway? What do you think of when I say that word, or does it throw you all the way back to grammar class? What's a pronoun?
I think that's how people identify themselves as.
Yep,
Yeah.
very good. That's one of the ways that we can identify a person or identify ourselves, which is partially why they're important. What else do you know about pronouns?
Ms. Jennifer Ruiz said how you may refer people or yourself.
Yes, it's a way of referring to people. So yeah, this goes way back to grammar class. And I won't say every language, but most languages have pronouns. Some don't, depending on how they're structured. Most languages have them. I'm going to be talking about pronouns mostly in English today, but that's because it's my first language and that's sort of my bias. But you can find these patterns in many different languages. So a pronoun, simply put, is a part of speech. Remember those nouns, verbs, adverbs. You know, I grew up back in the day when they made you diagram sentences on the blackboard. So pronoun is a part of speech that stands in for a noun, which is a person, place, thing, or idea. Today we're talking about personal pronouns, which are a way of referring to a person without using that person's name. So at the beginning, when I introduced myself, I said, my name is Dr. Susan, and I use she, her pronouns. So if you were out talking about this tomorrow, you would say, Dr. Susan gave a workshop for us, and she was really interesting. A pronoun may give an indication about somebody's gender, or it may not. In English, especially, our personal pronouns tend to be an indication of gender, but some people use them in ways that are a little bit more fluid. But we are talking about them tonight in the sense of how they get used when we talk about gender. So what are some of the pronouns you're familiar with, knowing this is my definition?
She, they, he, them.
That's
the one I know.
Well, that's pretty much the complement of the most common ones in English. So like she, her, herself, they, themselves. We use them all the time. And then out in the culture, we talk about using pronouns, and we sometimes sort of don't put those two pieces of knowledge together. So I wanted to do that. And certainly if you speak languages other than English, you can probably think of the pronouns in those languages as well. Like when I'm with people who speak Spanish, I say that I use ella pronouns, even though my Spanish is pretty rough. That would be how you would refer to me in Spanish. So here are those common ones that we might see in English. So you know, she, her, hers, he, him, his, they, them, and theirs. And you might see they, them, and theirs to refer to a group of people or to a single person, just one person. It is a pronoun in English, but we never use that to refer to a person unless the person specifically requests it. I do have a friend who uses it as its pronouns, and that felt pretty weird when I first met this friend, but they asked for it. But otherwise, that can be really dehumanizing, so we try not to use it. And then some people use what are called neopronouns, and there are dozens of them that exist, but these are the most common ones. So sie, which actually is a gender neutral pronoun in German, some people use. Some people use per, which is short for person. Some people will use sie. There's a bunch of other ones out there. But often people will use neopronouns because the pronouns in English are so tied to gender. And we make assumptions about people's gender based on the pronouns we hear used. And so there are people who kind of want to get away from that. I don't see a lot of neopronoun use at UNC Dallas, but I have a few people. And I actually have some friends who have their own pronouns because they didn't they looked at the options out there and said, none of these feel right. I have a friend who uses "fae" as fair pronouns, which took me a little bit to get used to. And you can definitely, I have some resources at the end that'll provide you with some longer lists if you're really curious about what options you have for pronouns and ones you might hear.
Dr. Harper, we have a student in the chat who asked, what are neo pronouns?
Oh, absolutely. They are, neo just means new, and pronouns are they are new pronouns, or they are where people have sort of moved away from the ones that are standard to their language. And this is a new set of pronouns that have been developed because people are looking for sort of a different way to express their identity. And sometimes they come from other languages, and sometimes they kind of emerge in different communities, and they kind of get some more mainstream use. The use is spotty. Some communities have a lot of people that use different neopronouns. Some communities have much more people that use kind of the standard ones we know in English: she, he, they, them. But they're out there, and if you're interested in language, it's super interesting to look at the list and kind of explore them, because you might run into them out in the world. So why do you think, I mean, I know I got my points up here in front of me. That's a great question. Why do you think it's important to know what pronouns somebody uses? Oh, I see a hand. Yes, Justice?
I think it's important to know what who pronouns are because it's a sign of respect, and it's good to respect people whether you're used to it or not. It's just a sign to show people that they're important and you care about them.
Absolutely. I love the way you put that it's whether you're used to it or not, it's important, right? Why else do you think it might be important? And often most of us don't, majority of people in the world don't ever have to think about our pronoun. Like we use the one that society gives us. I certainly never thought about mine for a long time until I started having these conversations with people. So I like to say that using the right pronoun for somebody is just as important as using the correct name for somebody. People deserve to be called what they want to be called. And I think it's just as if somebody goes through a name change, or they have a nickname that they prefer, or they like to be called by their name and not their first name, we respect that. It shows that we listen to people, that we care about them, that we see them for who they are. And that's sort of the baseline of human dignity and human respect, but that's one that we should all clear, right? So when we pay attention to the pronouns that we use, it helps us avoid making assumptions about people, because that can be harmful. One of the biggest assumptions is that you can tell somebody's gender by looking at them, and you can't. Sometimes people, through the way that they do their hair or their makeup, or don't wear makeup, or their clothing or whatever, might be trying to communicate their gender to you, but you can't tell. So figuring out how somebody wants to be referred to is important. It demonstrates that we have respect for other people, like Justice said. People deserve to be called what they want to be called. And it affirms and shows support for people who are transgender or non-binary, which I know those words might be new. So somebody who's transgender is somebody whose gender as they live it does not necessarily line up with the one that they were given at birth. Somebody who's not transgender, like myself, is cisgender. My gender as I live it lines up with the gender I was given at birth. I like to say the doctors took a guess and said, it's a girl, and turns out they were right. Sometimes they're not right. And then there are non-binary people who are people that don't fall neatly into one of the two sort of gender categories that our society gives us to choose from. And they can experience their gender in a number of ways. Yes, Nayeli, Miss Martinez.
Oh no, I actually just kind of wanted to provide some input as to also like why they're important.
Yes, please.
One of my first experiences as a freshman in college, I'm a first gen college student. So being at UNT in a sociology class, it was for a group project, and I didn't know that the person that another individual that was a part of my group was transgender, and she changed pronouns. So she told us about the pronouns, but I think coming from like never being in college before, nobody ever taught me about like pronouns. I always confused it, and I felt bad, and so I would always correct myself like, oh, I'm sorry. He's like, it's okay. But nobody really ever told me about pronouns. So for me, it was completely new as an 18-year-old going into a college setting and learning about this for the very first time. As I got older and crossed a lot of people at UNT, I started realizing that more people were adopting, like saying, these are my pronouns, especially in a classroom setting. Some of our professors would ask, how would we like to be referred to? And like our first class meeting, just so everybody could hear and respect everybody's pronouns. So I think it was super important. I wish that I would have learned about this in high school, or somebody would have told me about this. But it's interesting. It's interesting now how higher ed is changing, especially like in colleges. Before, professors would have asked you, what would you like to be referred as? Or what are your pronouns? Is there a nickname you would like to use? And I think it's super important now to be inclusive for all people.
Yeah, 100%. And I'm with you. I mean, I am trained at the highest level to be a scholar of gender. I have a PhD. And I had never really thought about this probably until not quite 15 years ago, but more than 10. And it was one of my students that educated me, because I was teaching classes in the sociology of gender at UNT. And I had a student who emailed me before the beginning of the semester, and probably had to do this with all of the professors that they were going to be taking, and said, this is my name. This is what my name will be on your roll when you get it. But actually, please call me this. And I use they, them pronouns. And I hope this isn't a problem. And of course, I'm like, I'll call you whatever you want to be called. But I had a moment, I realized I'd never asked. And I was like, oh my gosh, how many students have I called the wrong name or used the wrong gender pronouns for 16 weeks? And they didn't say anything to me because maybe they felt like they couldn't. But I had been essentially calling somebody the wrong name and the wrong gender the entire semester. And then I actually started using a little sheet of paper that if you ever take a class with me, like in a classroom, that you fill out and that everybody has an opportunity to fill out, to let me know sort of the name the university knows you by, what you'd like to be called, what pronouns I should use, anything else I should know about you. But that was a big learning curve for me. And I mean, I was in the classroom with people. So I totally feel it. And I've seen higher ed change a lot. When I got to UNT Dallas in my office, basically the first day, I was like, we're all putting our pronouns in our signatures now. And people did it. There's a lot of research that shows that calling people by the right pronouns, especially for transgender folks, whether they're, whether they fall under one of the binary genders of man or woman or a non-binary gender, that simple act of using people's correct name and correct pronouns does so much to make people feel welcome. It's good for mental health, and it helps to shift the culture to one that is more affirming of difference and of diversity. And I think that that's really important. I love that more and more people are putting their pronouns in their signatures. I wear buttons. If you see me around campus, I have my big lanyard full of swag. And we'll practice with this of how we kind of get in the habit of sharing our pronouns because the more people do it, the more like normal it becomes, and it's just something that we do. And I think that that is important. I know that, you know, I've had students tell me, like when I was teaching, that the fact that I give my pronouns when I introduce myself helps them know that, like, oh, okay, she kind of gets it, and I'm going to be safer in her classroom. And that's always something that I am looking for. But it's definitely, I love how this conversation hasn't come out of nowhere, but it's become much louder and much bigger in the last few years. So how do we use them correctly? Which is, it's funny to think about, because if we're out there, we're talking, like most of us don't think about like the finer pieces of grammar as we're out talking, especially if we're speaking a language in which we are fluent. So how do we use them correctly? One of the first things that you can do is to share your pronouns when you introduce yourself, even if you use the pronouns people might expect. I think most people who saw me on the street would refer to me as a she, you know, because I give a lot of cues. But I still share my pronouns when I meet people, both because it gives them a chance to treat me with respect and also invites them to share something they're comfortable in doing, and encourage other people to share their pronouns in meetings and such. I don't ever require anyone to, but I do invite people. So, you know, if you're with a group of people in a student organization that you're in, or you're, you know, meeting new people, and it can be just as simple as what I did at the top of our time together, which is to give you my name and say, I use she, her pronouns. You may, if there are people in the group that are unfamiliar with that, they may be like, what on earth do you need? What would we need to do that? What do you mean? And you can go back to, you know, I want to make sure we don't make assumptions about each other, and I want to make sure that everybody gets called what they like to be called. And usually people kind of get with that. The biggest thing I see when I do the pronoun share exercise out in my world is a lot of people are like, oh, I've never thought about it. I've never thought about it. I'm like, well, take a moment about it. If you want to try on a different pronoun, practice. And it sort of makes people comfortable with the practice, you know, and in the same way that you might say, like, you know, like my friend might say, well, my name is James, but everybody calls me Chase. And he deserves to be called what he wants to be called. Sharing your pronoun invites people to kind of know you a little bit better. And I think it helps build a more authentic relationship, and it shows respect for people. And the biggest thing you can do is practice. So we'll practice a little bit using unfamiliar pronouns, or if there's somebody you know well who actually says, you know, I use they, them now. That can take practice. You might make mistakes, and it can take time. So we practice and practice and practice until we get the hang of it. One of the best ways to practice is to make it a common thing that you do, that when you introduce yourself to people, you give your pronouns, or like I wear a she, her button on my lanyard. And that often will open a conversation with people. But we just practice. And I think one of the things that we don't notice that we do is that we use different pronouns all day, every day. Like, think about it. You know, you see a wallet that's sitting on a table in the library, and you say, oh, somebody left their wallet. I hope they find it. Well, we don't know the gender of that person. So, you know, we are using things like they, them all the time if we think about it. And so if we practice and have conversations about it, I think it gets easier. And there are a couple of resources I'll give you that have some worksheets that you can practice with, and we'll do a little bit too. So what happens if you make a mistake? The biggest thing is don't make it about you. Because I know the first time I really messed up on one of my friend's pronouns, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Like, I'm trying to get used to it. Like, it's not that I don't understand. And they were just like, oh my gosh, Susan, stop. This is not about you. Like, just say you're sorry and do better. That's all I want you to do. So I know we will often really want to make people understand that we didn't hurt them on purpose, but don't make it about you. You apologize and you correct yourself. So like the example, I will use one because I did this the other day. I was talking about my friend Morgan, and Morgan uses they, them pronouns. When I met Morgan, Morgan used different pronouns. So I was talking to a mutual friend and I said, oh, I was talking to Morgan the other day and she said she's really liking where she's living now. And the friend I was talking to said, gentle reminder, Morgan uses they, them. And I was like, you're right. Got that wrong. It didn't matter that Morgan wasn't in the room. And I said, yeah, you're right. I talked to Morgan the other day. They really like their new city. They really like their new job. So for every time I get it wrong, I try to then get it right 3 times. Like I'll try to pay 3 compliments or whatever, because it is the practice that gets it in your brain. And the biggest thing too is not to make excuses, because I know sometimes people will say, well, this is really hard. Well, okay, it is really hard, but keep trying, and most people will understand, especially if it's somebody you're just getting to know. And I think it is important to correct yourself and to correct others if they make a mistake, especially if the person is not in the room. One of the things that I really took to heart when I started doing advocacy and education in LGBTQ spaces, and when I started really getting to know a lot of transgender folks, is one of my friends said, I need you to promise me you will use my right name and my right pronouns even when I'm not in the room. And you won't let anybody else use my wrong name or my wrong pronouns when I'm not in the room. Because there are people who will purposefully use the wrong name or the wrong pronoun for somebody to say that they don't respect their identity, or to be like rude or be cruel. And so I promised my friend, I was like, I will, even when you're not here. And you know, I appreciate being corrected, whether it's the person themselves says, actually, you know, I use she pronouns, or like my friend did the other day about our mutual friend said, actually, Morgan uses they, them, because I want to get it right. I want to show respect for people, and not just people that I'm good friends with that like I have love for, but just for my other humans. And the more you sort of get in the habit of saying, I'm sorry, I got that wrong, and then stating it correctly in the same way you would if you said somebody's name wrong. You know, I have people every once in a while who will call me Sarah, and I'm like, no, actually, my name is Susan. And they don't get upset or like apologize or, you know, to the end of the world. They just say, I'm sorry, I got that wrong. And then they call me by my name. And it's really sort of that simple, but it's also that impactful. Like if you've ever been in a situation where somebody either calls you by the wrong name or uses the wrong gender pronoun for you, you know, that can be kind of like, oh my, like what? Really uncomfortable, and feel like people don't see you. And so wanting to give somebody that same respect, I think is super important. So let's practice. If you're comfortable, you can do it in the chat, or you can get on the mic. You can try introducing yourself and giving your pronouns. Anybody want to try that?
Can you repeat that?
Oh, all right. I see people. Yay.
Can you repeat what you said?
Yeah, absolutely. I said, do you want, if you would like, let's practice and try introducing yourself and giving your pronouns for the group.
Okay. My name is Justice Glenn, and my pronouns is she, her.
Thank you, Justice. So excellent. Justice is awesome. She broke the seal and was brave and was the first person to speak. Thank you for that. You can also share in the chat if you'd like. I know.
Okay.
Okay.
My name is Zari Wynn, and my pronouns is she, her.
Thank you. Thank you. Step right up. Thank you so much.
Anacleto Contreras, my pronouns are he, him, his. All right, so we have two students, Jennifer Rees. My name is Jennifer and I go by she, her.
Excellent.
My name is Cecilia Tena and my pronouns are she, her.
Thank you.
My name is Eddie Trevino, and I go by him, his.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Chantel, and I go by she, they.
Thank you.
Another student, my name is Bianca Torres and my pronouns are she and her.
Thank you. So I have a couple scenarios we can play with too. I know it feels kind of strange the first few times I did it too. I was like, what on earth? But you get to know a little bit about somebody's really. So there's a scenario that I like to use that. So I want you to imagine with me that you are you're hanging out with some friends and your friend Alex comes up in conversation and Alex uses they, them pronouns, right? So, and you know that's something that Alex has told you, but Alex isn't there today. You're hanging out with some friends. And one of your friends says, oh, I thought Alex was going to join us, but he had to work. What would you do in that situation?
I would correct them and be like, they go by they, them. Like respect their pronouns, you know?
Exactly. Very good. It's just that easy, right? How might you approach it if you're meeting somebody new for the first time? Do you think you'd be comfortable, or how do you think you would? Let's say you're partnered with somebody new. You're going to be partners on a project all semester. How do you think you might have that conversation? Anybody want to try that out?
One of the things that I always do is, and this might be wrong, but I haven't been corrected. And if I do, of course, I'll fix myself. But I always, call the individual by their full name, and continue calling them by their full name until they feel comfortable. Or I will get to that stage to eventually, whenever I do ask an individual, what are your pronouns, and it's a work in progress, like Dr. Harper was mentioning, the more we do it, the more comfortable we'll get, and eventually it'll be second nature. But I always do that. It's let's say if me and Jennifer are having a conversation, or introducing, I will continue using, Jennifer Rees. Jennifer Rees said this. Jennifer Rees said that. Or how are you doing, Jennifer? How are your family? Until okay, I'm gonna stop now.
But I think that's a great practice, and it's one of those things where I think when we start to have this conversation, part of why it feels awkward is that we realize that we sort of make assumptions about people when we see them, when we hear their voice. There's all kinds of things that we sort of, our culture tells us, like, oh, that's what a woman looks like, or that's what a man looks like, or that's, that voice sounds really feminine. And then we start to sort of like build an image of somebody in our mind, even just looking at them across a room. It's something that humans do. And so having something like a practice of, I'm not going to use a pronoun for someone, I'm just going to use their name until that person tells me what pronoun to use. It feels weird because it's not how we often speak, but I think it's a really good way to show respect for somebody and to start kind of checking ourselves on the assumptions that we make. I'll tell you, this came up in one of my staff meetings the other day, and y'all can laugh at me, but one of the things that comes out of my office is the mascot, the big like Jaguar-like cat suit you see somebody running around campus in. And we are in the middle of looking at clothes for the mascot because that's a thing my office does. And I caught myself, I was like, well, are we really going to get him a Letterman's jacket? And then there was this part of me that went, Susan, you don't know if that cat is a he, him. And I was like, oh, them. I was like, we're going to call Jax they, them until they tell us. And everybody in my office thought I was ridiculous. But I was like, no, like we like literally made an assumption about the gender of an empty cat suit. How did we do that? Like, let's question that. And everybody in my office is teasing me about it now. But it's one of those places that we catch ourselves, even when we're really aware of these issues, that we sort of make those assumptions. So Miss Martinez, I saw your hand up.
Oh, yes. I think my question is, I know we typically use, and I also, if students ever correct me and say, hey, I prefer you not to refer to me as that, I definitely will change it. But we are in this habit, even in since like grade school, where we are referred to as Mr. Martinez, Ms. Martinez,
Yes.
Especially with students, out of respect to a student. Sometimes I will say Miss Glenn, Miss Ruiz, or Mr. Trevino. Just, it's, I don't know, to me, it's a practice that we have culturally since grade school. So what would you recommend that we use? Or is it just one of those things that it's probably like an antiquated thing?
I think there are a few things you can do. And I think that's a really good question. Because I am not originally from Texas. I'm from the Midwest. So kind of calling people sir and ma'am is not something that is as common there. So when I came here, and like the number of people that called me ma'am, I was like, wait, what? Like, so yeah, the idea of using a title for respect, or using an honorific like that, it's absolutely a cultural practice. And that is some place that people get stuck, because you want to show respect to people, but you also want to call them what they want to be called. There's actually there is a gender neutral alternative to Mr. or Ms. that you can use, which is MX period, and it's pronounced mix. I do have someone in my office who uses MX. She uses she, her pronouns, but she prefers MX to any of the alternatives. So I will use that. I will ask people what they want to be called. My friends and I joke that it would be a lot easier if it was like the UK, where everybody is just called governor. It would be like Babylon 5 for everybody, where everybody's called sir. But I think that's a practice that we kind of have to play with, and it's one of those things we start to think about. So we can use the gender neutral honorific mix, or we can ask people and not use Mr. or Miss until the first time, until we get to know their pronouns. And I think that sharing pronouns up front helps us with that. There was a story that made the rounds, probably on Tumblr, about somebody who was in class, a high school English class, and their teacher used Mr. and Miss in respect of all their students. And this student was a non-binary student, so was neither a man nor a woman, so neither a Mr. nor a Ms. And she said they said their teacher came to them and said, Miss, I think it was like Taylor, Miss Taylor, and the student said they shook their head, and the teacher said, okay, Mr's not right either. What should I call you? And the student said, I don't know. What are my options? And the teacher thought about it and said, how about Commodore? Commodore is a great title. I could call you Commodore Taylor for the rest of the semester. And the student said, yes, I want to be Commodore Taylor for the rest of the semester. And I loved that they were willing to be creative. And the student felt free in that way. So we run into it too with, like, when we greet people and we say ladies and gentlemen, or you guys. English is a super gendered language, and figuring out ways to address people that still conveys the level of social respect that we want, but also conveys respect for individual identity can be like challenging. I love Southern English because we have the perfect gender neutral collective. We have y'all. I'm still trying to get you guys out of my vocabulary though, because it's so useful. But it, doesn't apply to everybody. I have a friend who, when she serves as an MC, she either greets the crowd with ladies, gentlemen, and friends beyond the binary, which I like. Or if she's feeling particularly silly that night, she will say ladies, gentlemen, and the people who know better. So I think to sort of play with the language and be willing to like let people offer you alternatives is really key. That's a great question. I mean, I solved it. I just make everybody call me doctor, but. Well, are there other examples you can think of where you've run into this in your life, or scenarios that you want to be like, oh, how should I have handled this? Or this is how yes, Justice, yes.
One situation is at work, like when you have to call somebody over or say something, or when, one thing is I used to clean the carts during COVID at my job at this grocery store, and I'll be like, okay, thank you, ma'am, or thank you, sir. I realize that's not such a good way to confirm people because you never know. And now I just be like, I just say thank you. I just avoid having to call somebody a pronoun, because, or sometimes you could be like, thanks, hun, or something like that, but you also know if somebody wants to be called that, or like if somebody prefers to be called, or you never know how comfortable people are with that, because you usually know somebody when you say something like that. So I just try to avoid using pronouns and all.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think that's a situation a lot of people find themselves in, and I talk about this particular example a lot, especially for people that it's part of the culture that they grew up in, that when they say thank you, sir, or thank you, ma'am, they append that kind of title. And I have definitely had conversations with my best friend is from West Texas, and he said that the first time he just said thank you to somebody and didn't say sir or ma'am, he said, Susan, I felt so rude. And I was like, I mean, the way that we're raised and the way that we're sort of taught to show respect, those go really deep. And, your intent is to be respectful of somebody. And he said it felt so weird. I use friend a lot. Like, I'm like, oh, thank you, friend, or can I help you, friend? But even I will catch myself still sometimes doing sir, ma'am. And then of course there are people that if you don't give them a sir or ma'am, they will let you know about it. But yeah, trying to sort of navigate that and seeing that some of the things that we were taught were super respectful might not feel that way to everybody. I think that's a great observation. Anyone else? Questions or thoughts?
I don't want to miss this chat. I think Jennifer
yes.
put it earlier. I call them by their name, and until I actually know their pronouns, I usually refer them as they.
Them.
Yep. They is a wonderful gender-free word. And I know that for one of the things that I've run into a lot is people say, well, I can't use they to refer to a single person because that's not grammatically correct. But they has been used as a single pronoun to refer to a single person since at least the 13th century in England, in English. So that's, we get stuck on sort of what's grammatically correct. And well, I'm kind of like, okay, like there's grammar and then there's people. Some people do get uncomfortable with that, but I do talk to people that take that exact approach that Jennifer's taking, of either using they, them, or just using someone's name. And there are people out there who will ask you, don't use any pronouns to refer to me, like refer to me by my name. which is, it feels clunky when you say it, but you know, you get used to it. My friend Finn is like that. Finn does not use any pronouns. Finn wants to be called by Finn's name when Finn comes up in conversation. And the first couple times I sort of did that, I was just like, okay, that felt really weird, but that was what my friend asked me to do. And so out of respect for Finn, I made it work. And I see more and more of that. It's really, really interesting how people sort of have their journeys and make their decisions about that. So I want to also give you some resources here. My inbox is always open. I want to give you these. I'll also email this presentation so y'all can have it to look at, and then I'll unshare my screen and we can just have some chat time. I really like the GLESSN, which is the Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network. Their name is super outdated, but they're a great organization. They have a whole pronoun guide that's got exercises to practice with and lists of neopronouns and just anything you could ever want to know. It's a fabulous place to start. Mypronouns.org is a whole website about this. And they honor International Pronoun Day, which is in the fall. The date is escaping me at the moment. Their guide is really, really good. And it's does a lot of explaining like the what and the why in far more detail than I did tonight. So if you're interested in digging into this, it's a way to go. And then Show Your Love Today has worksheets where you can practice, which it kind of gives you a scenario and gives you the pronoun the person uses, and then you get to practice with it. And that can be good if you want to practice sort of on your own, if some of this is new or challenging. It's really, really good stuff. And I share these out all the time. And then I'll be doing some more on campus starting in the fall too. I do a lot of different programs around issues of gender. And when we get back on campus, if you want to stop by my office and tell me your pronouns, I can provide you with a button or multiple buttons. If you use multiple pronouns, that's okay too. So I'm going to stop my screen share because I want to make sure that y'all have time just to ask questions. And I'm seeing good stuff in the chat. I really appreciate everybody that was willing to share in the chat or on the mic. I know like I'm a new person and this is, I asked you to do something kind of vulnerable. So I appreciate that. I think you enjoyed it too. But I want to open up for, questions about this or about anything that I may have sort of touched on here that you would like to have clarified. Anything that I can do for you. We've got some time left together, and this is your time. So what else can I share with you this evening?
I have a question.
Sure.
Okay, so my name is Jasmine Fletcher. And I wanted to ask, like, I understand that, people ask you to use certain pronouns, but I never got the they, them pronoun. I know it's like super broad, I know it's super open, but I never got it. Like, why would someone want to use they, them?
That's a great question. And there are lots of different reasons somebody might want to use that. What I see most people, and I of course use she, her, so I can only report on what people have told me or what I've read. But there are people who don't want people to make assumptions about gender. And so they'll use that because they, them is not associated with a particular gender. I have a friend who describes herself as what's called she's having a she day. I can use it today. Who describes herself as gender fluid. So some days she feels more like a woman and some days more like a man. And so that she doesn't have to sort of give everybody an update every day.
Yeah.
They is the most sort of common pronoun that this person will use. And when you meet this person, typically the pronouns this person gives is I use she or they. Every once in a while, if it's a he day, he'll let me know. So it's often tied to that people don't want um, to sort of have all the gender assumptions that
Okay.
um so, and for people that don't feel that they fall neatly into one box or the other. And then I've got some friends that will use they them pronouns, just because even if they feel very much like a woman or very much like a man, they're a cisgender person, they want to kind of play with those gender assumptions.
Okay.
I had never met anybody who used they them, honestly, until a friend of mine started about 12 years ago. And my friend my friend was somebody I had known and used she her pronouns for, and they came to me and said, I've had this sort of understanding about myself that my gender is something in between man and woman, and can you call me they? And that was new to me. And it's interesting. There's some good videos on the mypronouns.org page. If you go to their resources page, some videos with people talking about why they them is an important pronoun for them, and it's really interesting to listen to people's stories. It's a great
Yeah, because like I have one friend that she uses they them, and I always wanted to ask her, but I didn't want to come off as rude because I know sometimes curiosity can sometimes offend people. So I was just like, okay, I'll just call you they them, and I never understood like why until now.
Right. Well, and thank you for being respectful of your friend and not wanting to sort of pry or put them on the spot, and just using the pronouns they asked you to use. And it may be, if it's somebody that you're close to, they might be willing to kind of tell you more about it. You could tell them, hey, I went to this workshop and I'd always wondered.
Yeah.
Because it's probably a really good story. And it might give you more insight into them. So thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
Else have thoughts or insights or questions? I know in an hour, you just get to hit the high spots.
If we don't have anything, y'all, leave anything in the chat before we conclude.
Yep, and I'll put my email address in the chat too. And like I said, I will send out the PowerPoint so you can have the links, or if there are pieces of it where like, wait, she kind of went, or what did she say? You can go back. And my inbox is always open for any kind of questions. And I'm looking forward to getting back on campus and seeing smiling faces.
Oh, I have one more question.
Absolutely, fire away.
One more. I'm not trying to come off as rude, but I was reading a story about this woman. She doesn't have pronouns, but she refers to herself as something else, as in she doesn't refer to herself as human. She doesn't refer to herself as as the pronouns that we would normally call ourselves. I think it was this is gonna sound stupid, but I think she refers to herself as a flower.
That's a thing. People have interesting and complicated ways of understanding themselves. And I think as we talk more about, the pronoun conversation leads us into something deeper.
Mm-hmm.
So there are definitely, so this person, this individual doesn't refer to herself as a human. So there are individuals, there are beings out in the world who have more expansive understandings of themselves, and that can, if it's the first time you've run into that, be kind of like, and that's okay.
I was kind of confused. I was like, okay, so you don't refer to yourself as, he, she, they. I was like, okay, I understand that. All right, that's cool. So I'm like, oh, so you just like probably gender neutral. You just don't use pronouns. She's like, no, I refer to myself as this, as a flower. I'm like, great.
Well, and that was that individual coming up with a neopronoun that they felt was more accurate to their understanding. And that can again, it can be like, wait, what? But it is, man, the world is a wide, wonderful place, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Thank you for that. Thank you for sharing that. Well, I'll hang out for a couple minutes, and I don't know if y'all have any housekeeping stuff that you need to do for program things, but I'll hang out for a few minutes. And thank you so much for giving me your time and being willing to try stuff out and ask questions and share your stories. I very much appreciate you, and you can go out and try this in your life and let me know how it goes.
Thank you for joining us, Dr. Harper.